So just give a little spiel about who you are, and yeah, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shalondan, Hollingshed, and I do serve as president of the National Urban Young Professionals. I just want to take a moment before we get into it to just thank the Memphis Urban Young Professionals, VP Watson, and President Hafford for the work they're doing in the city, and then also to President Adams, Appointee Adams, and Black Millennials for Flint for the work that they're doing. I think the Black Millennials for Flint was the first organization that really expanded my understanding of environmental justice beyond saving the trees and the wild and the building and wilderness and the rainforest, and really getting to looking at racial issues and social justice aspects of environmental justice. So I appreciate her for the work and the leadership she has in this space. And so I'm excited to be here, looking forward to the conversation and sitting aside this young lady who's a leader in the advocacy space. So I'm excited to learn from them and also to just share my own personal experience as it relates to environmental justice.
Thank you. Thank you all for having us here. I'm Kawanza, the Advocacy Chair for the National Urban League Young Professionals, and a super fan of LaTricea and the work that she's doing, and being part of the home chapter where this idea to go to Flint because folks weren't moving things forward with a group of young folks and even groups of children to help serve the community of Flint, like just such a model of what advocacy in action looks like. So just so grateful to be here in this space as she continues to make room for Black folks to be in this conversation. So really happy to be here.
Oh, thanks, Kawanza. And then that is very full circle. So as you all know, I've said multiple times, I am a K-12 educator by trade. And how Black Millennials for Flint got started was actually through Thursday Network with the Greater Washington Urban League. Y'all, it literally started with, oh, we gotta do something. Let's just send some water. And then realized very quickly that that wasn't enough. And then to make a quick connection. So we did in 2016, it's the first time that we did what we call the Flint Weekend of Service. And we brought youth with us. So even though we have Flint in our namesake, we created the organization and the work because of what happened in Flint. And so we fundraised, we took middle school kids, their parents, and high school kids with us to Flint. That was many of their first time being on a plane, so that was like really, really fun. And we were there for about 4 days and 3 nights. And then maybe a week or two after those children got back to school, they got notices from their school that there was lead in their school drinking water. Literally like right after returning back from Flint. And so I was already like in my feelings about what was happening with Flint. And I'm like, wait a minute, wait. So literally in our nation's capital, like we're still having these issues. Even though water quality issues are not new to DC, but to know that, I mean, ridiculously high levels of lead in school drinking water in our nation's capital. I'm like, okay, we got to do more than what we're doing. So thank you for sharing that part. So let's go ahead and get in this conversation. Yep, I'm a millennial. I got my questions on my phone. I sure do. All right. So the first question I want to kick off to both Kawanza and Shalondan. So as we just got this first sneak peek of towards environmental justice, what stood out to you the most, and why do you think now is such a critical time for young Black folks to focus on environment? And either one of you all can begin.
Yes, so I'll start. So I will say that the summit in itself stood out to me. And we had individuals who were essentially like, they didn't create a table for me, so we're going to create our own table. And they all came together and validated each other's experiences and came up with these principles that essentially changed the environmental justice movement. And so they laid that foundation, that groundwork for us and for the work that we're doing today. And number 7 kind of stood out to me in particular, just because bringing everyone who's a stakeholder in the decision-making process together, I think is extremely important in terms of making sure that we have a comprehensive plan that addresses everybody. So I think that was important to highlight in the video, in the documentary. I will say that I think that it's a critical time for us to engage in this space now. One, because our lives depend on it, right? Our children's lives and our families' lives. I read that American Science said that 5 to 10% of cancers are genetic. which means that 90% are due to your lifestyle and your environment, right? Isn't that crazy? And I was like, maybe I'm the only one who didn't know that, but that's crazy. And you know, so when they say things like, does your father have lung cancer? Do your grandparents have lung cancer? You know, I used to think, oh, this is genetic, but possibly is due to the environment that we grew up in. And so it really kind of forced me to think about this differently. And I took a moment and looked through some of the effects of these toxins in our environment. And I said, this family member died from that, and this family member died from that, and this family member has that. And I realized this thing is a lot closer to me than the rainforest. It's in my backyard, right? It's a part of what we're dealing with in our community. And so if anything, I think it's a critical time just because our lives really depend on it. I will add that I also think it's a critical time because of the number of dollars that are being pumped into the environmental justice space today. And making sure that we in this young professional space have the opportunity to be the voice for the voiceless, right? And so when all of these dollars pumping into our spaces, we got to make sure that the funding is going to the people who need it, right? So really taking the initiative to stand up and re-engage in this process, I think is very important at this time.
Yes, Shalondan for like not just YP president, but president.
And I'm trying to think, I was like, okay, that's my point. So, just a few things I'd add, going back to the principles, that's what stood out to me the most. I'm in circles and spaces where people are trying to figure things out as if there's nothing that already exists. And to be introduced to those, now I'm like, okay, where did I get the full one? Is there an action guide? Like, how do we start these awareness campaigns? Automatically seeing that piece had me ready to activate. So that's something that definitely stood out about the short documentary for me. And I'll say, why now? We've been putting environmental justice on the back burner for so long, while we ourselves are impacted by issues that affect people every day that are related directly to the environmental movement. So it's like, are we going to continue to perpetuate the crimes upon the earth while we're fighting for these other justices, or we're going to acknowledge our own like physical lived experience, the experiences of our community members, and people that we love and trust and care about? So that's why now.
Violence against the environment. Let me tell you something. The environment was here first, and she's gonna thrive. Now, whether or not we're gonna thrive, that's the question. Okay. So that really resonated with me. Thank you for sharing that, Kawanza. Which perfect segue. So, why do you think the topic of environmental justice it's just not as sexy? It might not be as popping as other issues. So like, of course, like with millennials and with Gen Z, student loans is a thing. Now don't get it twisted. I want those to Biden, if you're listening, help us. So student loans and like criminal justice reform like really takes like center stage. But like you said, environmental justice is kind of on the back burner. So as the new NULYP advocacy chair, how do you think you could potentially like use this platform to kind of shift the dynamic and the attention toward environmental justice?
So I'm gonna keep talking about LaTricea because I'm just a super fan. But we'll randomly just have these conversations, and I'll hit her up and ask. And I think I hit her up immediately, like, what the hell? Like, are we not all living on the same planet? I also spoke to Shalondan about it. Like, do people not understand that these ice storms in Texas and Memphis, like, that's all environmental justice? Do folks not realize that, you know, the food desert and not being able to grow crops in their neighborhood, like, that's an issue? Like, and I went all the way off, and I really had to sit with myself to think, why isn't this a priority, and why aren't people as concerned as voter rights or other things that are coming up? I think, again, it goes back to not knowing that there has been work that has already been done and not knowing where to plug into these into this movement. I think I went to the Netroot Summit a few years ago, and the Hip Hop Caucus, a few folks were in the room talking about it, and I'm looking to see, okay, outside of the representatives from the Hip Hop Caucus, so I just think that young professionals don't know that there was already paved the space for us to plug in. And then I think because some of the writings on the wall make it seem like, oh, we're talking about the forest and we're talking about paper straws versus plastic straws. They don't understand how these things are connecting directly to them on their bottom line, opportunity to wonderful jobs, all types of cool things that are connected to centering environmental justice.
Yeah, and I like that how you wrap that up. One thing that I always say, and this is the same graphic that I use over and over again, and it talks about environmental justice and going green. Going green is cool. Like I'm with it, you know, I'm with the ideology behind it, but environmental justice talks about people. So all of these different things that are happening, all of these variables, how are they impacting people? And that's the missing part. And so I think like where things kind of went awry is, yes, like in the 90s, there was a surge like with focus on environment, but along the way, because there weren't all these black and brown people that came together, their voices were missing from like those seats of power. And so environmental justice kind of got left out of that. And so then you started to see like focus like on wildlife, which is very important. I think about one of the White House, the WHEJAC members. She is from Alaska, a native person of Alaska, and I love the way that she makes the connection between people and wildlife. So if you think about Alaska, like they eat this to eat, like right? So it's a part that's embedded in their culture and for survival. And so when you talk about things in silos, you can really miss the point, right? It's like, yeah, I fix this for the environment, but the why. We human beings are the why. So thank you for pointing that part out. And let's shift a little bit. So Shalondan, so very much like Memphis, Atlanta also, y'all be getting some crazy cold weather. I remember it must have been like maybe 4 years ago, y'all had a little mini snowmageddon situation going on. I know it shut it down. It shut it down. Now I'm a native Memphian, so I had to learn the hard way when I lived in DC, so I was able to navigate a little bit, even though I did not know how to drive in inclement weather. But people from the South, it's not supposed to be like this. We're not supposed to have this. So thinking about like how your southern cities in particular are being impacted, how do you think that this shift in climate change could potentially pose an opportunity for black people as it relates to green jobs?
Yeah, so I think it's going to increase. I think over the last 10 plus years or so, we've seen about an 8% or something like that increase in green jobs. And I think we're going to continue to see it, especially as, you know, our leaders and companies and our government officials are starting to focus on environmental justice issues and trying to create this green economy. So we're seeing jobs in construction and manufacturing and production and even in fashion. You talk about sustainable fashion. I mean, there is literally green jobs popping up in almost every industry. And I think that if you have a skill set where you can prevent pollution, you monitor pollution or clean up pollution, or even create some type of initiative that decreases the number of natural resources that we're utilizing to produce goods and services, you've got green skills. And there's probably a job out there in the green work, in the space, the emerging markets and green markets, or even in current industries that are expanding in this space for you. So we're seeing jobs that, you know, don't even require advanced degrees. High school diploma is sufficient for jobs that are averaging, you know, $26 to $30 an hour. So I think there is an opportunity for our black and brown communities to engage in this space as we continue to see more and more commitments around environmental justice, because it's going to add to more jobs.
Yeah, Kawanza, did you want to add on to that question also?
Also entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, and those leadership roles. We spoke project management, create something that's really on my heart and mind, and I think about it all the time, is there's this pot of money, who's managing where that money is going, who's writing that policy, and who's also there holding folks accountable. These are all ways that folks can plug into the financial opportunities.
Yes, that accountability piece, and that's the ministry, one that I take pride in, like in my 9 to 5. So it's really important that, and I think this is another part that really gets missed, is you can advocate for and even get like very, dynamic policies passed. But if there's not rules, if there's not, and then like considering who helped to create the rules, let's be clear, that those are jobs. And I think, and to connect back to what both of you all said, I think that within itself is an opportunity for education. I even think about with Black Millennials from Flint, it don't matter what you do, it can still be connected to environment. Like I think about like this recording that is happening right now is a talent that is necessary. We think about amplifying messaging. So specifically like with COVID, we still kept going with programming, and it took like your geniuses like with tech to be able to support platforms where you can still keep the educational model going. But we did, we have a series, a digital series that was born out of COVID because we had to shift to digital at one point, called Green Tabletop. And this gentleman that was one of the panelists said that there are about 700,000 green jobs that have to be filled. And so I'm like, that's real cute. Who's gonna do this training? That's a whole other job, right? So like, you just can't go to Target and just pull some employees like off a shelf. You know what I'm saying? So there has to be this full circle moment in this country for folks to be able to assume these jobs. 700,000.
Wow.
Ooh, child. The HR recruitment, everybody has to be hands on deck. So yes, absolutely. So good segue again to Kawanza, and she was very modest. Kawanza is a superstar as it relates to youth engagement, especially getting our young people like activated. One thing, and they learned it from Millennials, we're very opinionated people, and so are Gen Z. And so the other part of that is like, great, y'all smart, y'all popular, okay, what you gonna do? And so I think that, I know that Kawanza has a really strong talent with engaging our young people. So with this background, as we begin to think about a greener and more sustainable future, how should we get our young people involved?
It's so, first of all, a lot of them are already involved. That's something, I think, there are a few of my young people who are like, hey, why aren't we paying attention to this? Or did we circle back? Because I worked for the organization that stood up to city council about some of those letters, right? All of the young people's families weren't notified that there was lead in the drinking water. So there were several issues with what happened. That was before my time, but they're still actively engaged in that conversation. So there are young people who, in one way or another, are already plugged in what's happening, or at least want to start the conversation. So I think the first thing is definitely awareness. Political educations, and this is for Gen Z and Millennials, because we think we know everything. That's another thing about Millennials, right? So creating spaces for Gen X is like, yep. Creating space for shared learning, political education, that's always a first. And then creating opportunities for young people to be at decision-making tables. At first, maybe to listen and just to see how folks move in those spaces, and then to train them up to be able to share their lived experience on how, I've had asthma, and everybody in my household has asthma, and we're very clear this is because we live by the DC water plant, which is smack dab in the middle of my community, or something like that, so creating a space for them to share their stories, and then giving them the tools to take it from awareness campaigns to building campaigns, like full-scale campaigns around moving legislation forward, and also sharing the same information with people who may not come to a city council meeting, or who may not watch an update or read a press release or an op-ed. So training them on how to build their base and continue to bring people their age and even community and family members into that conversation, because a lot of the times our young people are the ones who are the spokespeople persons for their families. So, you know, some folks this might be just the status quo of what they're used to. Like, you know, it's just a thing. We all get cancer or whatever. Where actually, no, if we're involved in this conversation, maybe we can figure something out that works for us. So I know I said a lot, but definitely the education piece, creating space, and also moving out the way. Just moving out the way and not being attached to how things look. We don't do it the same way the folks before us have done. So we get a chance to really learn best practices from them as well. So yeah, I'm with the kids all day, and I learn something new every day.
You are absolutely right about that part about moving out the way. And I think that there had not been enough intergenerational organizing, like with environment, and one of the reasons why Black Millennials for Flint exists is to bridge that gap, to maintain that intergenerational organizing, because we do need information from the elders about what to do. We also want folks to rest. If I don't want to do this when I'm 70 years old, I can't wait to get the next generation, like, here, this is what happened with me. Here, go forth and be great and keep fighting a good fight. And I agree, I learned a lot from Gen Z, even with technology, as we saw today. My struggle life with getting the documentary going. But then even like with social media, the way that they can figure out algorithms, because I don't understand. They talk about millennials on Twitter and us not understanding hashtags. They right, even though we created the hashtags. That's fine. I'll take that dragon. But there is so much that can be learned from just intergenerational organizing. And I think that one of the things that I'm so blessed to have is just that. So y'all being like on calls, like on White House calls, and I'm like, that's Dr. Robert Bullard, like on the Zoom with me, like I can see you. Like this is so dope to be in the same space with a Peggy Shepard from WHEJAC in Harlem, with Dr. Beverly Wright out of Louisiana. It's just so powerful to hear what they went through, like, you know, before I was born. And this organizing space is just so powerful. And to bring it full circle, I try to model that. We have a young lady, and I'm gonna give her a shout out, Tiana Brown, a Flint native. She just graduated from Howard, and one of my co-founders actually was a guest speaker in one of her classes at Howard. And so she hit us up right after, like, I'm from Flint, like I want to get involved. How can we get involved? How can I get involved? And so we made her an intern. And so now she's like official staff. And so I bring her to EPA meetings with me. And I'm like, recognize this leader in this meeting, you know, where I'm like, girl, take notes, because I'm going to start having you coming to these meetings by yourself. I ain't going to leave you hanging, but I'm like, I wish that I had that sort of opportunity when I was her age. She's like 22. Child, I was just trying to just find a job at the time, you know. So I think, you know, and one of the things that I think happens a lot with millennials is we kind of get kind of stuck in that space, like we didn't have such and such, you know what, that's neither here nor there. What can we do to make sure that as we move forward that we're modeling, like, what kind of elder do we want to be?
Exactly.
You know, and so I think that that's also a point of engagement with young people, is just don't give them like frivolous tasks. Don't have me just like, you know, typing up stuff and getting errands and give you Starbucks. How dare you? You know, treat me, you know, like I am a leader up and coming. So I wanted to put that part in there too, because we've been there. If you had an internship, like really, like dang. Shifting into this next question, and then we're gonna open it up for further discussion with all of our tribe here. So to both Kawanza and Shalondan. So circling back to viewing this short documentary, and you'll have chances to look at it again when it's full out there. But what do you think you can take back to Atlanta and to DC and can work on right away?
Yeah, so so I'm very big on growth and development. I think that's one of the reasons why I love the Urban League movement so much. The young professional space is really a training ground for our young professionals to grow and develop as strong leaders while serving the Urban League movement, which is really centered around civil rights and economic empowerment. And so one of the things that we're really focusing on is voting rights, right? And some people may say, well, what does voting rights have to do with environmental justice? A lot. And right now, there are states that are using their legislative power to restrict our vote, to take our vote away from us.
Yeah.
And when you think about the power of the vote, that's really our gateway to having a seat at the table, right? They are really trying to restrict us from voting for a number of different ways, but having that vote really allows us to put people in positions who align with our values, as mentioned on the documentary, and who align with our values, particularly around environmental justice. At the state and local level, a lot of decisions are made. You know, where the landfill goes, your water bill, your utility bill, all those type of things are happening at the local and state government levels, and we are electing those people into office. And so, really pushing voting rights and working with Kawanza and our team to continue to push this platform and supporting voting rights is something that we will continue to do when we go back. And I think there's also an opportunity, specifically as it relates to environmental justice, to continue to connect our young professionals and encourage spaces like this in the young professional movement to educate our young professionals on environmental justice, and that it goes beyond the trees and really connecting it to their community, I think is extremely important. So that's something that we'll take back for sure.
So I'm thinking DC, what will I do in DC and what can I do nationally? And in DC, I think continuing to activate young folks who have the energy and the willingness to move in urgency towards creating equitable access to the environmental justice space, as well as to see what they can do incrementally over time to create a greener and more sustainable city. Especially when we're looking at what's happening with push out and development and housing insecurity and food deserts within DC. There's so much that we can do to tie this in, including figuring out a way to get young people trained up and ready to take advantage of the environmental justice, the industry, the financial industry around that. Nationally, though I tend to approach these things as an organizer, so it's data focus groups. So building out this this agenda, environmental justice it has to be one of the 3 items for the National Urban League Young Professionals. I was like, okay, I'll have it there as an asterisk just so they know it's important. But as we are in this lived experience right now, it would be irresponsible not to bump that up to make it a priority. And in doing so, having green jobs be a priority, making sure that we're having political educations, and also spaces where folks can do some of like the walking museum that we did earlier, where they can really acknowledge how, educator, facilitator, but how these things are again impacting their daily lives, no matter how much money you're making in this new city that you moved in, or even where you grew up. It's time to really start to connect the dots and find the humanity in this environmental justice journey.
Yes, so much work to be done. I'm just excited. I've been in the Urban League since 2008. Ooh. And I mean, I'm just really excited that this conversation is like so front and center. I think in 2008, I didn't even know anything about the 17 principles of environmental justice, or even about like environment being something that was just so pervasive in a way. For people that look like me, for my immediate family, and for myself personally as someone with chronic asthma, right? So just really excited about the opportunity to just spark change. It's just so exciting that I have people that actually want to come on Sunday, on Super Bowl Sunday, to talk about ways in which we can improve our environment. So I just wanted to say thank you to you all, thank you to Shalondan and to Kawanza, and I want to open it up to the audience, just questions that you may have, comments that you may have. This is an organic space. Would love to engage further in discourse.
Well, I have a question. And I hear you all saying that you want to get the young people involved. So is there an age range other than just middle school to high school? Have you thought about maybe starting it like in elementary? You know, you have the STEM schools, you know, you have certain criteria to have to get into the STEM schools now. But how young do you think that the youth should be involved in environmental justice?
I think as early as pre-K, as soon as they're starting like development. I think what it kind of boils down to is around capacity and full transparency. That's something that we both get excited about and struggle with. So we know that as Black Millennials for Flint, we're a very unique organization, but like we're small. And we are expanding, but not expanding so fast that we will fail. But I do think that it's really critical for us to start, I mean, as soon as children are developing speech, to get them engaged. One of the things that I push the administration on, they always talk about college. That's all they talk about, and just ignore. I'm like, dang, I'm here like a whole educator. I'm like, y'all need to invest in pre-K all the way to, so not just K through 12, but pre-K through 12. Who's gonna get these jobs that we're talking about, and we're completely leaving out like people that will be assuming these jobs? You leave them out of this whole spectrum, and then boom, you expect for all of these 700,000 plus jobs to be filled. So I think that that's an excellent question. I think immediately all human beings need to be engaged in that conversation. So I definitely think literally as soon as possible.
Okay, question number 2.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I don't be the one with all the questions. Okay. With all of that being said, have the thought of introducing an environmental summer camp to recruit youth. Has that conversation taken place?
I would love for that to take place, and I would love for somebody to give me some money so I can go ahead and get it pocket. So I will say, we with Black Millennials for Flint, we did finally bring in a pilot for a youth EJ program. And I word pilot because again, we don't want to go too fast, and we want to make sure that we are not going to throw stuff together for Black and brown kids, right? Because we've seen folks do that to our kids. And so it ranges from middle school to high school with the promise that we'll be able to scale to bring in our younger kids. Now, fun fact, we had a 9-year-old that we hired as a little contractor that contributed to the curriculum development. Now, it did take a lot of coaching. We actually paired the young lady I mentioned, Deanna, that just graduated from college, where she worked with both her mom and the child. Because she was like, I want to be involved too. I have something to say, and she did. And so that is something that we're really looking forward to doing. I don't want to give too much information because it's not confirmed, but we are working on doing a youth teen summit. It's actually, I know we're in Memphis today, but it will be piloted in Flint first because we want to give our honor to our namesake. We're really excited about that, so stay tuned about that. It's going to be a real big deal. But to get young people involved and invigorated, so that it's not just like a one-time event, right? So we want you to like get engaged here, but keep it going. So it's in the works. It's in the works. And whoever is listening, like wherever you are, y'all get the young people to help us. Get the young people involved as well. But